So thank you for being here tonight, but thank you in particular to David MacDonald, who is going to present to us Vessels for the Human Spirit. And I want to tell you a bit about David, though I hope you've read this and you already are familiar with him. He received his BS in art education from Hampton University and his MFA from University of Michigan, right here in Ann Arbor, where we're broadcasting from. In 1971, he joined the faculty of the School of Art at Syracuse University. And then years later, in 2008, he retired with the rank of Professor Emeritus. His work has been featured in several ceramic textbooks and magazines. He's also been featured in several nationally televised programs, including HGTV's Modern Masters and PBS's A Craftsman's Legacy. He's been given a number of awards in various national arts organizations, such as the NCECA, the National Council on Education for the Ceramic Arts Excellence in Teaching Award, National Craft Council's Master Craftsman Award, and in 2023, he was awarded an honorary doctorate of fine arts at Syracuse University. And since his retirement, though I don't think he's really retired, he's been active lecturing across the country and working in his studio. And so I guess I now have to introduce Dr. MacDonald. Take it away, David.
Well, I've always, once I received the doctorate, I told all my friends that if they want to call me doctor, they need to call me Dr. Dirt, because that's what I live for. I live for the opportunity to make things out of clay and share them with other people. So what I want to do is, to start out, I want to thank Margaret and the museum for inviting me to talk about myself, which is something I know a little bit about, and also to talk about my work in the field of ceramics. I'm always surprised when I'm asked to give presentations such as this, because I really don't feel like anything that I'm doing is that special or exceptional. I get up in the morning and want to make pots, and as I'm falling to sleep at night, I think about what pots I want to make the following day. So, you know, I appreciate all of you taking the time from, I'm sure, your busy schedules to listen to me rattle on about myself and my career. I structured the slide presentation to illustrate my development as a creative artist, but also as a person. I think it's important for young people to realize that the people that have achieved a certain amount of recognition, they all start at the same place, and that's the beginning, you know. And so that's what my slide presentation is going to be. It's going to start out in a very rough chronology, and then after that point is going to break down, and I'm going to be jumping all over the place, because that's the way I work. I work with ideas that sometimes circle back on each other, on themselves, and sometimes that they serve as an inspiration for a new direction. So hopefully there'll be time at the end for questions. I hope I'll have the answers, but we'll see. And so I'm going to start the slide presentation now. Okay.
It looks good, David.
Can you see it?
I can. All you need to do is arrow when you want.
Okay. Not yet. That doesn't seem to be working. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is a photograph of me and four of my siblings. I'm the third oldest in a family of nine children, 8 boys and 1 girl. My father always complained that my sister ruined a perfectly good baseball team. Um, but everyone kind of felt sorry for her, being the only girl with 8 brothers, especially when she brought home her boyfriends. But she was able to survive all of that very easily. This is where I grew up in public housing, 69 Railroad Avenue, Hackensack, New Jersey, northern part of the northeastern part of New Jersey. As a matter of fact, from the third floor of this building, looking in the right direction, looking east, I could see the top of the Empire State Building. Okay. This is a photograph from my yearbook. I was an athlete in high school. I ran track and cross country. I ran a mile and 2 mile. And I think in some ways being attracted to those particular events kind of prepared me for being an artist, because one of the things that happened that's true of being a long distance runner is that you spend a lot of time alone and practicing. And that's kind of what I enjoy about being an artist. I graduated from high school in 1963, and this was about the time when the civil rights movement in the South really started heating up. Black people were very active in terms of demanding rights that supposedly the Constitution guaranteed them, and as a young African American going into college and being in a situation where they're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do, and things like that. This kind of being the background music, so to speak, or the background noise. Most certainly influenced my idea of what I wanted my art to be about. I went to Hampton planning on being a painter, and my academic advisor suggested that if I wanted to make a living as an artist, especially as a painter, I should learn how to teach. And so he recommended that I transfer from the fine arts curriculum to the art education curriculum. And in doing that, I had to take a ceramics class. And that was very fortuitous for me, because I just fell in love with ceramics. I fell in love with the physical nature of it. I fell in love with the idea of utility. I fell in love with the magic that happens when you put something in the kiln and then you open up the kiln and it's completely transformed. The person that inspired me and encouraged me to develop my interest in ceramics was my professor at Hampton, Joseph Gilliard. And Mr. Gilliard got a graduate degree from Alfred University, and so he was very well versed in the technical aspects of ceramics, and that seemed to be more of his joy and interest than the art side of it. And many times he would say that the only reason he makes pots is to have something to test his glazes on, And so this is Mr. Gilliard. After he retired, my wife was from Hampton as well, and so we would go down to visit her family, and I would also make certain that I spent an afternoon with Mr. Gilliard. He has passed on to that great pot shop up in the sky. But these are the kinds of things that during my senior year I was making. I was trying to find a way of expressing my frustration and my anger in terms of the predicament of African Americans in this supposedly democratic country. And so my work took on a decided political tone, and I was pretty much inspired by just being angry about things. When I graduated from Hampton, I was fortunate enough to work at the University of Michigan, where I met Robert Stull. And as a matter of fact, it's an interesting story because I applied to the University of Michigan, and I never heard back from them in terms of being admitted or not being admitted. And so I took a graduate fellowship at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and Professor Stull tracked me down and invited me out to come and take a look at the facilities. He discovered later on that what had happened was I had been admitted and actually given a graduate fellowship, but my application somehow got lost. But one of the things that I am thankful for in terms of the individuals that I had an opportunity to study with, Joseph Gilliard and also Robert Stull, is that at that time there were very, very few African Americans that taught at major universities in ceramics. And I was fortunate enough to, by happenstance, I was fortunate enough to be able to study with two very, very competent individuals. Mr. Gilliard gave me the technical background that I needed in order to work successfully in clay, and Robert Stull gave me the aesthetic background and encouraged me to use my African heritage as a source of inspiration. And so this is a piece that I made when I was in Michigan. And this is what I looked like during my first year at the university, at Syracuse University. I was an angry young Black man, and my work was about my anger and trying to find some kind of outlet for it. And I say now I'm no longer the angry Black man. I'm just a little pissed off. But at any rate, my work was about trying to find things that I could express my anger and my frustration. And this was a series of pieces that I was working on at the time. This particular piece is called Violence is as American as Mom's Apple Pie. And in the center there, you see an elderly woman holding an apple pie. And it was kind of a commentary on the idea that in some instances, the people abhor violence or claim they do, but by some coincidence, when they need to get what they want, they're not above using it. This is a piece that I also made that was a homage to, the title of it is a homage to a victim. And basically it's about the instance where children are always the ones that suffer when adults make decisions. There's an old African saying that when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. And in many cases, and even today, you know, you look around the world and politicians and various people are making decisions based upon what they feel is right. But unfortunately, the ones that actually pay the toll for those decisions are the ones that are the most innocent, and that is the children. So this is a piece that was one of the pieces I made at Syracuse, and it was a whole series of pieces where I made a mold of this kind of tombstone shape, and I would decorate it and add various kinds of things to it, and it became part of a series, and it was about being angry. I remember having an exhibition at Syracuse early on, I had probably been at Syracuse for maybe about 3 or 4 years, and I had a one-man show at one of the local galleries, and it was a show that was filled with images such as this of anger and frustration. And I remember at the opening reception, there was this one elderly white lady that seemed to want to ask me a question. And during the course of the reception, she would kind of try to approach me, but then I would get engaged in a conversation with someone else. And at the end of the reception, she saw an opportunity to ask me a question, and she approached me and said that she thought that my work was very powerful, very well made, but she wanted to know if she could ask me one question. And the question was, you know, was there anything positive about being a Black person in the United States? And I don't know what my response to that question was. It was probably something flippant, because I hadn't been asked that kind of question before. It was the kind of question that in all the years of critiques that I've sat through, that was the question that probably struck home most forcefully. And so in mid-series, I started thinking, what should my work be about? And one of the things I decided that, and I remembered conversations with Robert Stull, and that was, I'm an heir to an artistic tradition that goes back thousands of years, and it should be obvious that I should be able to draw upon that tradition to be a motivating factor for the creation of my art. And so I started investigating African art, looking first at African pottery, because that seemed like an obvious gate into the African culture, and then looking at other things related to African culture. And this series changed from images such as this to images like this instead, where I was trying to express the fact that I am an heir to an artistic tradition that goes back thousands of years, and that I wanted to celebrate that. And that also the idea that the features of African Americans, although we had been indoctrinated to believe that we were ugly, in fact we were not. And so this particular piece represents that idea. So I started looking at a lot of African art, and one of the things that I discovered that kind of struck a responsive chord for me in terms of African art was the fact that they decorated a lot of stuff. They decorated everything. The decoration not only performed a utilitarian function, but also a spiritual one as well. And so I started looking at Nigerian pottery primarily, and this particular piece was probably the signature piece that inspired me to investigate the idea of carving patterns or designs onto the surface of the pot. And so I developed this tool to do that. And this is the decoration that I'm probably the most well known for, is using this wooden tool, which is just a piece of ebony with a notch cut into it with a round file. And in this particular case, I'm showing it over a plate, a large plate that I will be in the process of decorating. And so the next 10 slides or so are just a progression of how the pattern develops. And so dragging the tool through the leather hard clay and using a compass and straight edge, I lay out the pattern. And then using that tool with a little water to help soften the surface, the pattern develops. Oops. And oops, I want to go back. Can't go back. Well, at any rate, so these are some examples of how that particular decorating technique has evolved over the years. The casseroles, I enjoy making lidded vessels. There's a kind of mechanical thing that I enjoy, making two things that fit together perfectly, but then also the idea of making two separate objects and designing them in such a way that they look like they belong together, and then there's the whole idea of hiding something and then uncovering or discovering it. So this is the next series of slides is a series of images of some of the plates that I've made using that particular tool. And these plates range in size from about 18 to 24 inches in diameter. One of the things I started doing when I started looking at African art, one of the sources of inspiration was African textiles. And there's a textile tradition in Western Africa called Adinkra. And the Adinkra tradition is based upon a whole plethora of symbols or images that represent certain things in terms of human life and interpersonal relationship. This particular symbol struck a responsive chord for me. It's called a knot of reconciliation, and as a matter of fact, I use this quite a bit in terms of an image on a whole series of plates that I've made. And also, this particular series of plates is what I called my quilt series. My wife was a quilter, and there was one time when I was thumbing through some of her quilt books, looking at patterns, and I realized that some of those patterns might be interesting on my plates, and so I did a whole series of plates that used quilt patterns in the central image of the plate as well. And also looked at a lot at African architecture. One of the sources of inspiration was I had found a book called The African Mural, which is a book that pictures architectural decoration in Africa. And one of the amazing things I discovered was that most of the architectural decoration that's done in traditional African cultures are done by women because it's considered to be a domestic chore, And so I started looking at or trying to find as many examples that might create interesting patterns. And then I ran across these people, the Ndebele people of South Africa, who are remarkable in terms of, well, their dress and the costumes, but also in terms of the architectural decoration that they do, which to me, this is a piece, an earthenware piece that was done based upon the Ndebele neck ring decoration. But this is an example of a homestead of an Ndebele family, and all of this geometric decoration was done by the woman. of the household. And so that inspired a series of earthenware plates that I call my African mural series, which this is one example of. And then also one of the other things that I discovered in researching African culture was body decoration. And this is an example of what's called tattooing or scarification that was practiced in various parts of Africa. And that inspired a series of what I call ceremonial bowls. And these are earthenware, they're pit-fired, covered with a terra sigillata, and they stand about 19, 20 inches tall. But the patterning on the surface of the bowl, I was trying to get something that was reminiscent of the scarification. And I wanted to also make something that looked ceremonial, that looked like it was old and had a lot of history behind it, as opposed to something that was glazed, that looked new all the time. And so that's why I was inspired to work with terra sigillatas. The only problem with that is that the objects were not very functional. They were very fragile, and when I tried to ship them to exhibitions, they would wind up coming back broken. One of the other sources of ideas, now, one of the problems with trying to put together something like this is that I probably make 100 to 200, maybe even 300 pots, depending upon what commissions I have a year. And I jump around with a lot of different ideas. I'll work on a particular series, and then something else will attract my attention, and I'll work on that for a year or so. And then, and looking back over images of earlier pieces, I'll have new ideas for a series that I stopped maybe 5 years ago and get back to it. It kind of reminds me of a quote that I remember reading in undergraduate school when I was reading an article, which was an interview of this American sculptor by the name of David Smith. And the interviewer asked him what he felt was the most difficult part about making art. And his response was, he felt the most difficult part about making art is that for every piece you make, it generates an idea for 10 new pieces, and there's never enough time to make them all. And I can commiserate with that dilemma, because most certainly I would love to be able to go back and redo a whole lot of things with new ideas, but there's never enough time. And so this series of pieces, which are called the Nyama series, and Nyama is a Swahili word that means the essential life force, and in some cultures it means meat, but essentially it's would be equivalent to what in the Western world is called the soul. And I wanted to create a series of vessels, and these are vessels. Everything I make is a vessel, even though it may look like a piece of sculpture. That top part lifts off as a lid. I wanted to make a series of pieces that embodied that idea of Nyama, the essential life force. And one of the inspirations was the African hairdos. And so I worked on this series for maybe about 10 years, and these are just a few examples of the variations. To give you an idea of the last couple that I made, the scale they eventually wound up being, and this is that particular piece finished. And what I started doing was I started incorporating other non-ceramic elements as well, raffia, bones, wire beads, and things like that. I had mentioned earlier that I love the idea of a covered vessel. I love the idea of discovery opening up, pieces fitting together. And so this next series of images are some examples, I think it's some examples of some of the covered vessels that I've made over the years. I'm actually doing a couple of workshops this summer, which I'll talk about maybe towards the end. And the workshops are on lidded vessels, different ways of making lids. This particular one is porcelain. I feel, and this is porcelain as well. I enjoy working in porcelain sometimes. I feel when I haven't suffered enough, I start a series of pieces in porcelain, especially since porcelain has a much shorter leather hard stage than stoneware, and most of the decorating I do during the leather hard stage. So I have to change my work pace when I'm working in porcelain, as well as clean my studio. And if any of you have worked in porcelain and stoneware, you know you can never get rid of all the stoneware, regardless of spending weeks cleaning your studio. But this series of covered jars was inspired by having to make a funerary urn for the ashes of my wife. And these are earthenware, the slip trailing and carving, sgraffito. Then there's a series of forms I made that I was looking at some books about the Maasai people of East Africa, and I was looking at some of the vessels or containers that they use, and one of which is the calabash vase, which is a gourd like vegetable that has a hard shell. And I like the idea of the shape of it. And so I did a series of pieces based upon that kind of double lobe shape. This particular piece stands about, I think, about 28, 29 inches. And then going back to the Adinkra textile tradition, I ran across this particular symbol, which is the symbol of affluence, power, and abundance and plentiful. And I started incorporating the similar kind of pattern, this kind of a quadrifoil pattern on the surface of some of my some of my calabash vases. This is also part of that calabash series as well. A more recent one is probably made sometime around 2010. And this is a later one, a smaller version. This is probably about 14, 15 inches tall. Then there was a series of pieces that I did, earthenware pieces. I wanted to do something about the slave trade. But I wanted one of the dilemmas, that intellectual dilemmas I have, is that the slave trade was a horribly inhuman practice that mankind should be eternally ashamed of. But by the same token, if there hadn't been a slave trade, I wouldn't have been in the United States. I wouldn't be here. And so there's kind of this dichotomy in that there's nothing good about the slave trade itself, but because it happened, I happened as well, and many other African Americans happened as well, who have enriched this culture immeasurably. And so I wanted to do a series of pieces based upon the slave trade. And so these are what I call the Middle Passage series. And then the plate is what I am, at least in terms of Syracuse, I'm the most well known for. And a lot of the plate designs that I'm doing currently are based upon African textiles. This is a piece of raffia cloth from West Africa with a grid-like pattern. And this is a sample of cloth from the mud cloth tradition in Africa. And these are some porcelain plates that kind of take advantage of that grid pattern. And this is also another example, but another style of mud cloth. And I've incorporated some of the symbolism and ideas into some of my porcelain plates as well. I enjoy making small porcelain plates because I can do some interesting things with them in terms of sgraffito. And so this is another example of taking a quilt pattern and altering it somewhat. And this is also a pattern based on a quilt pattern as well, porcelain. Then I was introduced by a friend. I was introduced to Zulu ceremonial shields. And one of the things I found interesting about them is how they divided up space in a very interesting way. Circular space, because the shields are circular. And so I started thinking about what are some different ways that I can divide up the circular space without using concentric rings or using right angle grids. And so I did a whole series of plates that were trying to see how I could articulate that idea. And then there is the series of stoneware pieces that I call my Figurative series. They are based upon the human figure, the female figure, I like to think. They're covered vessels as well, and they range in size from probably about 3.5 feet to 18 inches. And this will give you an idea of the scale of some of them. And this is another variation on that idea. And this particular piece as well. This particular piece was purchased by the Carnegie Museum. And although I was glad to get the money, I was sad in terms of losing the piece. And then this is another example of mud cloth from West Africa. And this is a more recent series. I started this series in 2021. And they're earthenware, and they stand about 30 inches, 32 inches in height. They're covered vessels, and they're also part of this Figurative vessel series. The lower part is the pattern is inspired by that example of mud cloth, a brightly colored mud cloth. And then the next group of slides is probably what I enjoy doing the most. When I was taking my first ceramics class with Mr. Gilliard, we had just finished the first assignment, and he was firing that kiln over the weekend. And so I knew that he would be probably unloading the kiln that Monday morning, late Monday morning. I figured I'd stop by the ceramics shop just to see if my cup had come out of the kiln, because the first assignment was to make a mug. And I was on my way to educational psychology, but I figured, I'll just walk through the studio and see if my cup was done. I walked into the studio, saw Mr. Gilliard unloading the kiln. He pointed out my chrome green, lead-based glazed mug. And he said, Mr. MacDonald, that's a very nice mug. It probably was the ugliest thing he ever saw. But he complimented me on it, and he also said, like, you can use this mug in the dorm when you're staying up late cramming for exams, And for me, the notion that I could take this material that has no intrinsic value and turn it into something that's beautiful, but also something that's useful was completely foreign to me, and I was skeptical. And so I decided, instead of going to educational psychology, I'd go back to the dorm and I'd make myself a cup of instant coffee in my chrome green mug. And I made the cup of coffee, sat on my bed, put my feet up on the desk, and I was amazed that it actually worked. Because I had grown up in public housing and no one made anything in public housing. Your father didn't have a workshop in the garage or in the basement. If you wanted something, you went to the store and you bought it. So the idea of being able to make something was completely beyond my experiences, and I was skeptical. But when I made that first cup at Hampton and used it, I was hooked. I wanted to have that feeling again of using a clay object that I had made, that I had fashioned, and I had made. So for me, I spend as much time as I can making functional pottery. People like to call me a ceramist or a ceramic artist, and I always correct them that I'm a potter. Even my large sculptural pieces are pots because they're vessels, and I go through a lot of technical gyrations to make sure that they're lidded and that the lid works. And so the next series of slides are some of the functional stuff that I've been making that has always been kind of a touchstone for me when I'm in between commissions or I'm in between exhibitions and I just want to make stuff that people can use. And so these are a series of porcelain cups. The bowl has always been a fascinating form for me. A lot of people think bowls are kind of boring, but to me, there are so many different variations on the shape of a bowl, from a very open bowl to a very closed bowl to a spherical bowl to a flat and open bowl. But also, I like the idea that the bowl gives me a surface on the outside that I can decorate as well. And I think in many instances, I am a kindred spirit with the Mr. Gilliard in that a lot of times I think the only reason I make pots is so that I have a surface to decorate. So these are just some examples. I got contacted by the Dinnerware Museum many years ago. They were running a project where they selected some artists to make something based upon a certain theme. And the theme in this particular case was butter. And so I made a couple of these butter dishes. I think the museum purchased one of them. I can't remember which one they purchased. But it was my opportunity to luxuriate in color and in lusters and such, and I enjoyed it a lot. And then I got contacted by Margaret again, and the next project was to create a vessel that was based on the theme of breakfast. And for me, on Saturday morning, waking up to the smell of bacon cooking, what was always my ideal idea of breakfast. And so I made this covered dish as a butter dish. This is where I live, 113 Clare Road. And by the way, if any of you happen to be in Syracuse, please come by and see me. Okay, I have this policy that anyone who comes to my house for the first time leaves with a free cup. Okay, so maybe that'll encourage some of you to come to Syracuse. I wouldn't recommend you coming to Syracuse on a day like this, though. This is my studio. I had it built so that it matched the architecture of my house. It's 2 stories. This is my main work area on the inside. This is sort of an idea of how I go about working. I usually, when I have an idea for, let's say, a series of pieces like plates, I'll make a dozen or so, get them thrown, tooled, and in the leather hard stage, and then wrap them up in plastic, and then probably spend 2 or 3 weeks carving them one at a time. And this is one of my joyful times when I'm making a lot of just functional things. I have colleagues in ceramics, and some of them in sculpture and painting, who solve problems intellectually. And that is, they kind of work things out in their heads before they actually start making stuff. I'm a production potter, and I find solutions by making a lot of stuff. And as I said earlier, I make between 200 and 300 pots a year. And I wasn't talking about my big pots. I was talking about my little pots, my functional things. You know, because for me, it's easier to work out ideas and to find solutions in doing multiples. Because eventually something will strike a responsive chord. And this is an example of a series of vases that I was making just to try to work out an idea. This is a photograph from some years ago of my family. My wife, Dorcas, my oldest son in the upper right, Joseph David. He was named after Mr. Gilliard. I was so impressed with Mr. Gilliard that I named my first child after him. And then my daughter was born 6 or 7 years later. When my sons would give her a hard time, I would tell them that she was the only one we actually planned. And she was born actually on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And then there's Jeffrey, which is in the upper left. And he still lives in Syracuse. He lives not too far from me. He's a bachelor. And he has, and he and I go to the gym every morning, Monday through Friday. He can lift more weights than I can, but I'm smarter than he is. And so that's my family. This is my wife many years later. As I mentioned earlier, she passed away last year, as a matter of fact, the day before Mother's Day, and I miss her dearly. But we met in undergraduate school. I was a sophomore and she was a freshman. She was from Hampton, so she took me home one Thanksgiving holiday because I couldn't get back to New Jersey. Her family fed me and they couldn't get rid of me after that. We dated in undergraduate school, got married during our senior year, and we were married for 55 years. And one day we'll be together again. This is the end. It's a picture of me doing what I enjoy doing the most, and that is surrounded by pots that I'm decorating. So.
Thank you very much, David. That was fascinating. Fascinating. So.
You're welcome.
So people, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or what else can they do with them?
You can put them in the chat, or if you raise your hand, we may be able to unmute you so you could ask a question. I think you can raise your hand on Zoom.
I have a question.
Yeah.
David, I'd like to know, because normally when I see your work, it's your giant platters and and the functional work in galleries and things. So tell me the names, besides the Carnegie, where else you have your big pots and your larger vessels. Where can I go see those?
Well, you can come to 113 Clare Road.
I'm writing it down.
But the Everson Museum has several of my pieces in their permanent collection. And the Palmer Museum at the University at Penn State purchased one of my large pieces as well. Most of my large plates and even my large sculptural pieces are in private collections.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to give us a list so we can go knock on all their doors too.
I'm not sure if they would enjoy that.
So we have a few questions and comments that have come in. This first one was very early in the presentation. Your pottery is absolutely beautiful and inspiring. I think that we can get a lot of people to agree with that. And there's a question, do you work by yourself or do you ever use assistants?
For me, my studio is my sanctuary. And as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family of 9 children. So there were 11 of us in a 4-bedroom apartment, okay? Which meant that there was a lot of sharing of space. And art for me was my way of separating myself from the herd. While my brothers were out playing the baseball and basketball, I would be in the apartment drawing, And so for me, art was always a way of a way of creating a world that I controlled and that I was privy to. So I used to joke that the only time that I actually had a space to myself was when I built a studio, because I grew up in an apartment with 11 people. Well, actually 10 people, not counting myself. I went away to college. I shared a dorm room for 3 years with someone else. I got married and shared a bedroom and apartment with my wife, and I'm not complaining about that, but it's just a fact. And then also, for me, the studio has been a place where I can go. I have control. If I put something down, I know it will be there in that same place when I go back a day later, an hour later, a day later, a week later. It's also, I was quite deliberate in terms of sizing the size of my studio. I mean, I wanted it to be big enough for me to work comfortably, but not so big that I would have this compulsion to try and fill all of the space. And also I've been approached by a number of people, and I'm always flattered by it. I've been approached by a number of people who have asked, if they could apprentice with me or assist me, and I've turned them all down because it's like being a long distance runner. It's my chance to commune with myself on a very personal level. And the other problem is that if I had an assistant, one of the things I would have to do is I would have to figure out when I wake up in the morning, not only what I'm going to do, but what they're going to do. and then see if they do it the way I want them to do it, you know. So I've been very, very circumspect in terms of limiting the number of commissions I do, limiting my commitments in terms of production to the point where I'm not constantly under the gun or under stress in terms of putting out a lot of work. And so to answer your question, no, I would not enjoy having someone else sharing my studio space with me.
So that almost leads into this next question. Do any of your children have any interest in pottery or being a potter?
No. And it's the kind of thing that a lot of kids don't want to do what dad does, you know? And so they all spent some time exercising their artistic gene, if you might say that, in high school, drawing and painting and such, but they've never had an interest in terms of pursuing it as a career. And they knew that dad wasn't going to let them work in his studio. So that might have been a factor as well.
So another question, what was the most gratifying thing, if anything, about teaching ceramics?
You know, I taught at Syracuse from 1971 to 2008. And then I retired, and then they talked me into coming back and teach another year. They wanted me to teach this specialty class, ceramic technology, all right? And I agreed because I thought I missed teaching. But after that year of teaching ceramic tech, I realized that no, I didn't miss teaching. But while I was teaching between 1971 and 2008, the course that I enjoyed teaching the most was introductory wheel throwing, first semester. And although I taught, you know, intermediate wheel throwing and advanced wheel throwing and graduate wheel throwing, the class that I would always be excited about seeing what has happened and being engaged with the students was the introductory class. Because I think one of the things that it did for me was it allowed me to relive that aha moment, that moment where, hey, this actually works. You know, I can do this, you know, and when I see someone who's been struggling for 3 weeks just to get a lump of clay centered, and then they finally figure out how it's supposed to happen and how to make it happen and how to keep it happening, you know, it's always a gratifying moment for me, you know. But also, and it may be also because the needs of an introductory student are much more straightforward than the needs of an intermediate or an advanced student or a graduate student. I think of intermediate students as being infants or babies. You know, their needs are quite simple. You feed them, you change them, all right? You feed them and you change them. You know, whereas once they get a little more involved in the aesthetic part of ceramics, and they start asking those tough questions that teenagers tend to ask all the time, then it gets to be a bit hairier because there isn't always an obvious answer. And a lot of times they expect you to have an answer to their particular problem. And sometimes it's just a matter, you just have to work it out. You have to go in the studio and do the work. You know, and so the part that I enjoy the most about teaching at Syracuse was the introductory classes, because it gave me an opportunity to open up a realm of experience that I completely was enthralled with, and to see these beginning students, come to that same realization is always quite satisfying.
Hey, David, would you mind telling us, I think we're going to have to wrap it up, but would you mind telling us where you have workshops?
Oh, okay. All right. I have in April 20, and I guess you can Google their website. In April, I have a 2-day demo that I'm doing at the Baltimore Clay Works, and then in June I'm doing a 1-week workshop, hands-on workshop at Snow Farm Craft Center in Western Massachusetts, and then I'm doing in June also I'm doing a 1-week hands-on workshop on lidded vessels at the Shake Rag Art Center. It's SHAKERAG, Shake Rag Art Center, and I'm not sure where it is. It's somewhere in the South, but I'm not absolutely sure where it is. But I guess you can Google it. And then in August, I'm doing a 2-week workshop on lidded vessels at Anderson Ranch in Colorado. So
wow, thank you. So
that's
I guess
going to be my summer.
So when I come visit you at your house at 113 Clare Road, I won't be coming while you have workshops going on.
Yeah, just called to make sure that I'll be in town. And I was serious about, the free cup. That's one of the things, that's one of my traditions,
You're on my list. Next
I
time
enjoy,
I'm in Syracuse, I'll make a
I
special
enjoy
trip.
people using my stuff.
Okay, well, we want to thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, David. It's been fantastic. Love it.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I hope that I haven't bored you too terribly with my presentation.
No boredom at all. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're
Good night,
welcome.
everybody.
Good night, everyone. Take care.